There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. Scary ghost stories, yeah. Last Christmas, I told a ghost story during the Christmas time in tribute to that Victorian tradition of telling ghost stories during the Christmas holiday season. So I thought I'd tell a ghost story this year, perhaps start my own tradition of telling a ghost story every year during Christmas time. This story is a legend that comes from the Upper Hudson Valley region of New York State, and it's called The Hangman's Noose. At the turn of the century, not the last one, or the one before that, or the one before that, right on the cusp of the 16 and 1700s, not far from the little town of Catskills, New York, was born a child, Roger Sutherland. Now, this child was born into the gentry, people of wealth and means. Now, usually, being born into wealth is a good thing, but not always. And for Roger Sutherland, it wasn't a good thing. You see, as Roger Sutherland grew into manhood, he developed a number of vices. And his wealth allowed him to feed those vices. Roger Sutherland learned at a young age that he liked rum. And he spent lots of money on rum. He learned that it was fun to gamble. And so he spent lots and lots of money on gambling. He learned that he liked women. And he spent lots and lots and lots of money on women. Now, eventually, Roger Sutherland's family cut him off. But he was still left with a farmhouse, a barn, a large tract of land, which would have been enough for anyone else. But not for Roger Sutherland. He did not want to work. Now, he did have enough money to purchase a piece of paper, a document, on which he signed his name. And now he waited for a ship to come into dock. And when a young Scots girl got off, she signed that same document. So that now she would be Roger Sutherland's indentured servant. For 3 years, she would have to work for him, and in exchange, he would provide her room and board. And after that 3 years, she would be free. Now, the young lass, she was so happy to be in this new land, and she was ready to work, willing to work. And work she did. She cooked for Roger Sutherland. She cleaned his house. She even worked in his fields. But that was not enough for Roger Sutherland. He wanted more. But the young lass, she would have none of it. "You'll not be touching me." And she made sure that the wooden door of her bedroom just off the kitchen was always closed, latched, and locked. One afternoon, Roger Sutherland had stumbled out of the local tavern, and when his eyes adjusted to the midday sun, what he saw made him angry. His fists balled, his eyes squinted, his jaw was set. There, walking along the cobblestone street of the town, was his indentured servant. She had come into town to do some chores. But, walking side by side with the young lass, was a young man. And the two, walking side by side, were talking, smiling, laughing, looking into each other's eyes. And whatever it was, Roger Sutherland was filled with emotion, anger, jealousy, ownership, meanness. Well, he made his way home, where he hid behind the front door. And when the young lass came home and bounded into the house, Roger Sutherland pounced on her. He made the girl pay. And then he grabbed his jug of rum and he fell into a drunken stupor. When he awoke, he called the girl's name, but she did not answer. He walked to her bedroom and the door was open. He looked in it. She was gone, and all of her belongings were gone. How dare she? Who does she think she is? She's my property. I know where she is, and I'm going to get her. Sutherland stumbled to the barn, saddled his horse, climbed upon his horse, and before he left, he grabbed a long coil of rope. And he walked that horse right to the farmhouse of that young man that he had seen that very day with his servant. But he didn't walk right up to the front gate. He didn't tie his horse to the stone hitching post in front of the house. No, he hid in the woods. And now he waited and watched, waited and watched. Wait, there she is. And he saw the young lass coming out of the back of the farmhouse. Her skirt was flying. She turned back, smiling at the farmhouse, and she was on her way to the necessary, the privy, the outhouse. As soon as she was in and the door was closed, Sutherland made his move and raced from his hiding place, went around the back side of that outhouse and crouched down low. He just sat there waiting, watching that door. And as soon as that wooden door creaked open, he jumped from his hiding place, grabbed the girl, put his hand around her mouth, dragged her back to the woods, gagged her, bound her wrists together with that long coil of rope that he had brought, took the other end of that rope and tied it to the tail of his horse. He mounted his horse and they began the ride home. This poor girl walking behind. But Sutherland, what a mean, rotten bastard he was. He'd turn around and grin. Come on, Big Red, pick up the pace. And he'd make that girl run after them. Now, horses, as majestic as they might seem, are not always the smartest of creatures. And on this day, a black snake slithered onto the path right in front of that horse. And rustling the leaves, that was all it took for that horse to rear back on his hind legs, throwing Roger Sutherland onto the ground, and then off that horse went, running at full speed. By the time Sutherland got up and saw what was happening, it was too late. That horse was gone. But he yelled, "Stop, Big Red, stop!" It didn't matter. That horse was going. And now Sutherland began chasing after that horse. He's screaming at the top of his lungs, "Stop, Red, stop!" Until suddenly, "No, Red, no! Stop!" Oh! What had happened was this. That horse had headed right toward a low rock wall and then easily jumped over it. But when that girl's body got close, it slammed into the wall and it broke. She broke completely. Now, by the time Sutherland caught up to his horse, a neighbor who had been out scything the wheat field had come down to see the commotion. The horse the sides were heaving. He was foaming at the mouth. And that young lass was not a young lass anymore, just a pile of ripped skin and broken bones. The girl's head was snapped backwards. Its eyes were open, looking straight at Roger Sutherland almost accusingly. The mouth was agape, as if caught halfway in a scream. The arms were broken and twisted. One was wrapped around the girl's neck. The legs were splayed and broken in different directions. It was a horrific sight, even for Roger Sutherland. Now the neighbor contacted the local constable, and Sutherland was arrested. A trial was held, and it took the jurors a short amount of time to come back with a verdict. And the judge announced the verdict. Roger Sutherland, you have been found guilty of murder, and you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead. The jurors nodded in agreement, the people in the courtroom. But I believe I told you that Roger Sutherland was born into wealth, into a family of means. If you are from a family of means, of wealth, you have connections. And the judge continued, stating his verdict. Roger Sutherland, you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and the date of your execution will be on your 99th birthday. Well, the jaws of the jurors dropped. The people in the courtroom let out a communal sigh of exasperation. What? But then the judge, he was smart. He continued, "Clerk, bring me that noose." And the clerk had brought him a noose, a hangman's noose that had been fashioned out of cord. And he placed it over Roger Sutherland's head. "Roger Sutherland, I am tightening this around your neck. You are required to wear this every day of your life in public. This will act as a reminder for all the citizens of our community that no one is above the law." And that seemed to mollify, to appease the people in the courtroom, or at least some of them. And Roger Sutherland, he could barely contain his joy. But he waited until he got home, closed the door behind him, and then, stupid people, he ripped the noose from around his neck, threw it out the window, grabbed his jug of rum, and fell into another one of his drunken comas. But a while later, When Sutherland awoke, he was gasping for breath. And he grabbed his neck. The hangman's noose was still around his neck. I must have been dreaming. And he took it off and threw it into the flames of the fire in his fireplace. And now he stumbled into his bedroom and fell into his bed. In the middle of that night, Sutherland awoke to the sound of horses' hoofbeats. And then, right from outside his window, the scream of a young woman. And Sutherland, gasping for breath, the hangman's noose still around his neck. He took it off, put it on his oaken table, took his kindling axe and chopped it into pieces, took it outside and buried it deep into the ground. But it didn't matter. Every night thereafter, he would awaken to the sound of those horses' hoofbeats, the sound of a young woman screaming at the top of her lungs right outside his window, and once again, that hangman's noose around his neck. Day after day, he suffered with the hangman's noose, the hoofbeats of the horse, and the young woman's scream. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Roger Sutherland was living a nightmare until he finally made a decision. I can take this no longer. I am ending it today. And he jumped into a lake, only to be pulled out by some local fishermen. He climbed to the top of a cliff and jumped off. And miraculously, he fell into some trees. The tree branches held his clothing, and he wasn't scratched a bit when the neighbors pulled him down. No matter what Sutherland tried to do, he could not end his life. And so he lived in misery, and he realized, I will die of my drunkenness and old age. He turned 40, and he did not die. And 40 was pretty old back then. He turned 50, and he did not die. And every day he lived this nightmare. He turned 60 and did not die. When the big war came, with George Washington and that other guy, Alexander Hamilton, he enlisted. He made sure he wore a snow-white tunic. He went right to the front lines. A bullet never came close. And so Roger Sutherland, every day, drinking and living his nightmare, turned 70, then 80, then 90. On Roger Sutherland's 99th birthday, he sat in his home alone, waiting for someone to come and take him away and hang him by the neck until he was dead. He waited and waited, and no one came. The judge in the trial was long dead, as were all the jurors, all the people in the village who had been alive back then. They were all dead. The people in his community just knew him as that crazy old man who wears the hangman's noose around his neck. The crazy old man that we keep our children away from. And so Roger Sutherland lived to his 100th birthday. And on that day, he died. And his neighbors put his body into a plain wooden coffin. And when they tacked the lid onto that coffin, he lay there in repose with the hangman's noose still around his neck. And that's where he is today, in his coffin, with the hangman's noose around his neck, 6 feet under the earth, somewhere up in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains. So if you ever take a trip up to the Catskills to maybe hike or bicycle like I do, or to hunt or fish, or just to see the mountains, it's a beautiful place. If you go and you decide to stay overnight, I'm going to caution you. Make sure at night you close your window. Because if you don't, in the middle of the night you will awake and you will hear the sound of a horse's hoofbeats. And then you will hear the shriek of a young woman screaming, the ghost of that young woman screaming in the night, still haunting the Catskill Mountains. And that's the story of the Hangman's Noose. There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. I hope all the ghosts that visit you this Christmas season are friendly ones. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.